Hi, it's Pastor Andy with our Monday video for this week. And despite the popular phrase, no pain, no gain, I really don't know that many people who like to suffer. But I do think that phrase, in the right context, does have good meaning to it. It captures a truth that we can go through some short-term difficulties, some short-term struggles and sufferings if we know that it's going to lead us to do something beyond our current abilities now. Thus, people go through training and exercises and stuff to get faster and to get stronger and to have more endurance. And for some, it's just a hobby or a habit. And for others, maybe that stronger and faster and better leads to something great, like an Olympic medal or something like that. Well, Jesus uses this same idea of short-term suffering and long-term joy in His teaching as well. In fact, in the last full teaching that He does with His disciples in John chapter 16, verses 20 through 22, Jesus told them this: "You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn into joy. When a woman is in travail, she has sorrow, because her hour has come. But when she has delivered the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for the joy that a child has come into the world. So you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, and no one will take your joy from you." Now, Jesus said this knowing He was about to die, and their sorrow would have been that they were going to be missing their friend, missing their Savior, missing their Lord. But beyond the sorrow, each of the disciples would eventually suffer, and the same idea was true. They would suffer now, but when they saw Jesus again, well, their hearts were going to light up and they were going to rejoice, and the joy that would come to them at that point would never be lost. The same is true for us. We suffer now in all kinds of ways, and during the past year, many have struggled with all kinds of health aspects. The COVID gets the primary attention, and certainly many have lost family members due to COVID. Many have lost family members due to other situations. Others have lost jobs for various reasons, including COVID. Some people struggle with money generally. People struggle with relationships. They struggle with emotions. And by struggle here, I don't just mean a little bit. I mean real suffering in some way, shape, or form in each of these situations. But the reality is that we do often see suffering fade away in some of these. It's kind of like when we stub a toe. It hurts like crazy for a bit. Maybe it's even black and blue for a few days afterwards, but the pain subsides eventually. To take one of the examples I just mentioned a moment ago about perhaps someone losing a job, that happens a lot. But maybe, not always, but maybe they're able to find a better one, and it lessens or even removes the pain. But at least, even though that may not happen all the time, at least we can understand the premise that these things do happen. Well, the same is true of the suffering that Paul mentions in Romans chapter 8. In verse 17, which we looked at last week, it says that to be glorified with Jesus, we will experience suffering with Jesus. Then in verse 18, Paul says that the suffering will come, but it's only going to be temporary. At the most, it is confined to this lifetime, which I realize is all that we may truly understand, all that we may truly recognize as we think of it now. But when we think of eternity, the scope changes greatly. Thus, as real as our suffering may be, and as intense as our suffering may be, we can have hope knowing that our suffering has an expiration date. At least, that's true if we know Jesus. And that's why we have hope. It is a hope that may have to wait for months or years or maybe even decades. But it is also a hope that once fulfilled will be fulfilled for eternity. Of course, what I just mentioned is only true for those who know Jesus. For those who do not know Jesus, they will have suffering in this life as well. Absolutely, we all do. But when this life ends, the real suffering will begin. Jesus speaks of those who will experiencing weeping and gnashing of teeth in Matthew 25, verse 30. That is true suffering, and that will be an enduring suffering. But that suffering, again, is only for those who reject Jesus. So if you do not already know Jesus and you want to avoid real, long-term, unending suffering, well, you can exchange that for eternal joy by exchanging following the world versus following Jesus, making a decision to following Jesus. Your suffering on earth may continue. It may even get worse. That happens. We're not promised an easy life on this earth, but the glory that awaits is far better than any pain this life can bring to bear. That is the promise of God. That is the hope that we can have. So let us rest in that hope, eagerly longing, but patiently waiting at the same time.